FAO is proud to present Mr. Chris Stephenson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Stephenson, and I head up the Secretariat of the Plan Vivo Foundation. And today we're going to be talking about the transaction costs and incentive mechanisms of some of our community-based carbon projects. So for those of you who are not familiar with the work of the foundation, Plan Vivo Standard is a voluntary carbon market standard. We have a pro-poor approach and a very participatory approach to payments for ecosystem service, project development, monitoring, and ongoing management. There are currently 12 registered projects under the standard, and these look after around about 10,000 smallholder farmers and community groups. There's another 33 projects at some phase of development. The standard has issued around about 2 million tonnes of certificates so far, and we have distinct efforts to keep transaction costs very low and equitable benefit sharing arrangements. So in terms of the certification costs under the standard, as I said, these are kept very low. They're essentially subsidized. So our review costs of PINs, PDDs, the technical specifications, and the validation review would sum to about $2,000. Obviously, there are external costs to these projects, one of which is the third-party validation, which takes place before a project is registered, and that can be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. We also have an external verification, which typically tends to take place every 5 years in a project, and this is again is an external cost of around about $10,000 to $25,000. The project development costs themselves, the feasibility studies, and the initial work is often donor financed, and that's not built into these calculations. So moving on to the next slide, we have a case study here from Trees for Global Benefits in Uganda. It's one of our most successful projects and was recently awarded the Seed Awards prize. And this is coordinated by a group called EcoTrust since 2003. It's an agroforestry project with Mysopsis, Albizia, Milicia excelsis trees, and these are done in sort of mixed native woodlots. There's currently around 3,000 hectares under management and around 2,500 smallholder farmers, and it's scaled up quite rapidly over the last 11-12 years. If we look at the PES payments, which are made directly to farmers in terms of cash, it's just under $1,000 per farmer, based on an average land holding of 1.25 hectares. And there we can see a variety of some of the corporates that have purchased Plan Vivo certificates from this project. The next case study is one from Nicaragua. It's recently expanded into a new municipality called Somoto, but it was originally in Limay. It's coordinated by a group called Taking Root, based out of Canada, and this has only been going for around 4 years, but is scaled up again quite rapidly, and is now at 280 families. The total PES payments, the payments for ecosystem payments, would total around about $3,500 over the 10-year payment period. And I should probably mention that sort of these are front-loaded, so that the first 4 years, actually 50% of the payments are made. You can also see some of the corporate buyers there, as well as the Inter-American Development Bank. So if we take a quick look at the incentive mechanisms, essentially under these projects there are a variety of benefits to the smallholder farmers. So not just the cash payments which are made as a result of the carbon revenues being sold on international markets, but also some of these indirect and other revenue streams coming from timber, from NTFPs such as fruits, honey, different micro enterprises that might also be incorporated into these projects. In the case of Nicaragua, you can see the annual emissions, or issuance is around about 60 to 70,000 tons, an average price of $7 per ton. The benefit share is basically is stipulated by the Plan Vivo standard, and it should be around 60% as a guideline, and that is the case in this project. We did some work recently around trying to estimate the transaction costs in the first year, where obviously administration, HR, monitoring, training, recruitment sort of requirements are much higher, and the figure of $170 per hectare was coming out of those, coming out of that research. But these costs would rapidly drop off as a project scales up, and there's much more work in the first couple of years of one of these projects. So if we take a look at the other project, the Uganda project, the issuance is slightly higher, sort of anywhere between 70 and 140,000 tonnes a year. Slightly lower carbon price, but the benefit sharing arrangement is very similar, around about 60%. And then if I could focus your attention on the pie chart on the bottom right hand side, you can see that these PES payments form around about $2 million of the total expenditure of this project, and that is obviously the largest portion of the revenue dedicated to these PES payments, followed by salaries, some of the expansion costs into new areas which might be funded by donor funds, and then certification at around $250,000, office costs, travel, monitoring, third-party audits, coordination, marketing. If we move on to the next slide, a few takeaways from this brief summary. There's obviously a clear need to strike a balance between the assurance of mitigation benefits to buyers, giving them confidence in what they're buying, versus the costs of any particular interventions, any monitoring protocols, and the practicality of actually delivering that on the ground. Community monitoring requires simple yet conservative approaches to be successful. There's quite some work in building capacity, in training people, in handing over responsibilities to communities over time. But these can all be done by a learning by doing approach, and ensuring that meaningful PES payments, transaction costs are minimized at the same time. There's obviously a clear need to scale up so that transaction costs, as we've seen, are minimized, and these can only be done as economies of scale kick in. There's also a need for affordable methods to quantify the carbon benefits. So we are seeing now a lot of innovation in terms of monitoring technologies, using smartphones, iTouches to enable the collection of data, but also new tools are emerging, such as Shamba, which allow quantification of soil carbon stocks, which maybe traditionally were excluded from these kinds of projects due to their complexity. So that's a very brief summary, but I'm happy to take any questions, and my contact details can be found on the next slide here, and I'll be happy to field any questions. Thank you very much.